Hello, everybody. Yes. Welcome. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for braving the San Francisco traffic to be with us this afternoon. This is the third event in the Women Powering Business series that I've had the pleasure of hosting. And I must say that every time I host the discussion, I leave with some new ideas, some new energy. Each time the discussion is a little bit different, depending on the city that it's in. I just did one in Calgary last week. We did one in Atlanta about a year ago. Just really fascinating reflection of the business community in which we have the conversation. And I think that today will be no different. The purpose of the Women Powering Business program is basically to get successful women together and to get them talking so that they share ideas, they share insights, they share experiences so that we can all then go back to our lives with new engagement in our own careers and new strategies for helping women in our organizations and in our lives to pursue their own potential. And I hope that today you leave just brimming with inspiration and strategies that you can put to work starting this evening. Our panelists are from a vast array of industries and organizations, and I think you'll find their insights most interesting. And I think this is probably our most distinguished panel to date, so I'm very excited to get them on stage. But before I do that, how many Formula One fans do we have in the audience? I'm impressed. All right, me too. Only recently, though, I must admit. So Randstad sponsors a Formula One team, the Williams team. Great team, best team. We don't always win, but we're a challenger. And they'll be racing this weekend in Austin. So on her way to the race, Susie Wolf agreed to join us here today. Susie is a development driver for the Formula One team and one of only 4 women to be involved in Formula One racing this decade. And here's another interesting fact. Since 1950, there are only 5 women, I believe, who have raced in a Formula One race. So this is an excellent example of a trailblazer or somebody who is breaking new ground in an industry where there aren't a whole lot of female role models. So I think that we will all derive a lot of inspiration from Susie's story. So Susie, if I can ask you to join me on stage.
Yeah, and there's nothing worse than coming to an event and having to stay in the clothes if you've just had a kind of 8-hour flight. So it wasn't the best start to the event, but it turned out okay.
Yes, it did. I think that just added to the whole thing. So what is it like to work in such a male-dominated industry as Formula One racing?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here today, and it's great to see so many successful women in the room. I'm in a very male-dominated world, and that's why these events I love doing. So thank you for asking me along, because it gives me the chance to meet other successful women, and I think ultimately we're all somehow in the same boat, facing the same challenges. My role as a development driver for Williams came about because I started racing when I was only 8. It was my big passion in life. I don't do it because I want to prove a point about women racing drivers, how good we can be against the men. I simply do it because it was my passion. It's what I love doing, and I'm very proud to be part of the Williams Formula One team. Like you rightly said, we're not the best on track this year, unfortunately, but we have an incredible team spirit. We have an incredible heritage. We had a very iconic founder, Frank Williams, and now his daughter is a deputy. So I'm very proud to also work for one of the very few women in Formula One.
That's great. Where did you get your inspiration? What made you start?
I think I was very lucky at my beginning because I had quite a romantic start in life, because my mum met my dad when she went to buy her first motorbike from his shop.
So that your mum was buying her first motorbike.
My mum was buying her first motorbike.
It's in the genes.
It's a little bit in the blood, I think. Look back, I think I was incredibly lucky that my parents never made the differentiation between myself and my brother. Mum and Dad bought me a little go-kart.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the start. I think they maybe will regret the day that little go-kart appeared.
Difficult times. I've heard you talk about, you know, the great moments, but I've heard you talk about some of the real bumps you faced along the road and how you got through them. Do you want to share one of those times with us where you really wondered, you know, am I going to make it? Am I going to get through this?
There was many bumps along the road, and I always like to share those moments, because sometimes I think people look at me and say, oh wow, she's in Formula One, it's glamorous, jet set, how cool, but believe me, it was not an easy path to get here, and I always believe you need the bad days, because then how do you know what a good day is if you don't know what a bad day is? But I'll share one story with you. When I was 22, I was racing in Formula Renault, which is like a smaller version of a Formula One car, very much on the ladder up to Formula One. I was racing against Lewis Hamilton, Nico Rosberg, and I was nominated for a very prestigious award in the UK called the British Young Driver of the Year Award. And a female had never made the final of this award, and I was nominated as one of the final 6. And we had to go to a prize ceremony in London in front of all the big names within Formula One, and they would then announce the winner. So at the beginning of the evening, we were all standing on the stage, and Sir Jackie Stewart, for those of you who know Formula One, will know the name, a very famous double world champion in Formula One. He was presenting the award. So we were all called up onto stage. So I was standing on stage with my 5 male colleagues, and he went to start, but he said, but wait a minute, we're missing one of the finalists. And I'm standing there, my face went bright red in front of everybody. He said, yeah, wait a minute, where's the 6th driver? So I stepped forward and I said, my name is Susie and I'm the 6th driver. And he looked at me with a quizzical look on his face and he said, that's right, we've got a girl in the competition this year. And you know, he was announcing the award later that night, so I knew he wasn't reading a girl's name out as the winner. So that was a bit of a tough one. I think I went off the stage and to be met by his wife, who said to me with quite a stern look in her face, why would you ever want to be a racing driver? And at that moment, in moments like that, you kind of think to yourself, God, is the world against me here? What's going on? But it was those moments that also made me so determined to prove that I could be a successful racing driver. And a little kind of circle to bring it back, I was very proud. I got honoured with an honorary degree from Edinburgh University just 1 month ago. And who was asked to present me with the degree? Sir Jackie Stewart. So I think in the long run, I won that one.
And do you think he remembers that moment as clearly as you did?
I made sure he remembered that moment. I was very, very keen on saying to him, oh, you know, we met at the Autosport Awards for the Young Driver of the Year, and he said, oh, I do recall something.
Do you have a role model, Susie?
I think in terms of a role model within my sport, it's very difficult because, like you touched on earlier, there wasn't a successful female in racing that I had aspired to. I think in the States you have Danica, who's incredibly successful, but she's roughly my age group, so I never was able to look to her for inspiration. But in all honesty, when I look back now, I think my mother and my grandmothers were a very, very big inspiration to me because they were all very strong, independent women. They weren't feminists. My grandparents, both sets, were married for over 50 years, and my parents have been married for over 30 years. So it's a very solid foundation of my mum and dad supporting each other. And my mum had her own business. She drove a motorbike. She pushed me just to be the best that I could be. And she always made me feel like I never had any boundaries or limits. And I think that was a big reason why I ended up on a career path, which is possibly seen as not normal for a little girl. And And it's also the reason why this year, when the book came out by Sheryl Sandberg, Lean In, and I know we have a panelist here, so I'm looking forward to hearing, it resonated with me so well, because we've just got to lean in. We can't be defined by our gender. We've got to be defined by our characters.
And what would be kind of your best piece of advice to women who are trying to do just that, who go to work every day and maybe get comments similar to you got from Mrs. Stewart, asking you, why would you want that? Should a girl really be going for that type of thing? What's your advice to women?
I mean, I always like to say you're all successful in your own right, so I don't like to preach my own advice, but what I've followed so far, which has held me in great stead, is follow your gut feeling, follow your passion. When I was 18, I was forced, or not forced, but it was very expected that I would go to university and have a good education behind me. So I went to Edinburgh University. I started studying what you study when you have no idea what you want to be, which is international business. And I did the first year, but I felt very much like a duck out of water. I would sit in these big lectures and say to myself, what am I doing here? I want to be a racing driver. I'm just a sheep following the flock. And I just didn't feel right there. And I was trying to race at the same time, and I felt like I was doing both things not very well. And when I started my second year at university, I was walking back after the first lecture, and I sat down on a park bench and I said to myself, what are you doing now? Think, because this is a defining moment. Do you carry on with university? Do you follow your dream of being a racing driver? And I just listened to my gut feeling, which said, you want to be a racing driver. That's your dream. And even if it doesn't work out, you've got to know that you gave it your best shot. So I called home, and thankfully it was my dad that answered. And I told him I wanted to leave university, and he said, okay, go home, pack your stuff up, I'm going to collect you in the morning, and then you're going to decide what you're going to do. And 2 days later, I had a little car full of all my belongings. I drove down to Silverstone, was living in a shared house with lots of other racing drivers. I had nothing, no money, but I was following my gut feeling. I was following my passion and my dream, and I was the happiest I'd ever been. I felt where I belonged, and that ultimately led me to getting into my dream of driving in Formula One. And I always believe if you follow your gut feeling and you follow your passion, it will bring you fulfillment, it will bring you happiness, because you're doing what you enjoy and what you love. And so the tough days are so much easier to cope with when you're doing something you really enjoy.
No, that's great advice. I think we can all work that into our own picture. Are there any questions from the floor for Susie? Any budding drivers?
Anyone racing through the traffic to get here?
There was. One of our panelists came with her helmet. I was quite impressed.
Very impressed.
I suggested she wear it on stage. I don't think she's going to, though. Yes?
I'm curious, what do you aspire to now? What do you see for yourself in the next 5 years?
I have a very clear idea in my head, because I'm also a great believer that you need goals. You need short-term and long-term goals, because otherwise, where do you know where you're going? And it's sometimes quite brutal to set those goals, because you think, okay, the pressure's on now to actually achieve them. I'm only a development driver for the Formula One team. I want to be on the grid. I want to be racing. I want to show everybody in the world that a woman can race at Formula One level. Many think that we're not physically fit enough. Many think that we don't have the mental aptitude to race at that level, because it's the most elite form of racing you can get. But I'm a great believer that you can, and I want to prove that women can. So it's tough. It's really tough. There's only 22 spaces on the grid, and many good, fast drivers aspiring to be into Formula One. But I'm in the fight. I'm going to give it my best shot, and if that doesn't work out, I think I will move into the business side of Formula One. But right now, all my energy is going on to getting on that grid.
Well, we're all rooting for you, Susie. That would be great. Thank you. Terrific. All right. Thank you so much. That was
Thank
great. I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Ursula Williams. Ursula is the Executive Vice President of the Randstad Finance and Accounting Division. And Ursula is going to introduce our panelists.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I am really excited to introduce these panelists to you. As Linda had mentioned, we have a wonderful group of women from diverse industries and points of view. So it is sure to be a lively discussion. I'm going to introduce you one at a time, and if you'd please just come up. First panelist is Audrey Cooper. And Audrey, I'm going to make you bring that helmet.
You got to bring the helmet, Audrey. It goes with the theme.
Audrey is the managing editor of the San Francisco Chronicle. She is the first woman and the youngest person to ever hold that role. Since Audrey has been the leading editor in charge of the San Francisco Chronicle, the investigative reporting aspect of the unit has really become very, very significant. I am from the Bay Area, and those of you that are probably are aware of the numerous awards that her team has achieved for covering some pretty serious issues in the Bay Area that are relevant to all of us. I'm going to mention a few, and I know that they'll come directly to your mind. The San Bruno explosion that was deadly several years ago due to failure of safety for the PG&E. I'm sure you guys recall that one. The most recent nearly disastrous decision to use faulty bolts on the reconstruction of the Bay Bridge. Her team covered that. Our endless fight over marital equality was covered flawlessly by your team. And the de-accreditation of one of the nation's largest colleges is also on that list of topics that were covered and award-winning. So really, really outstanding work, and we've all benefited from it significantly. She is a native of Kansas City. She is a Boston University graduate, and she most recently was named as one of the top 10 women in the world to watch in her category. So we are really pleased to have you. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Next panelist is Julie Sue. Julie serves as the most recent past president on the San Francisco Commission of Status of Women. She is also very active in community service. She is the senior staff counsel for the California Department of Insurance. Her work is incredibly vast and ranges from civil rights to political campaigning to human trafficking work to hate crime projects and so on and on. I was joking with her this evening about getting in just before this moment. She said, well, I am studying 2 languages and getting ready to work on a film. So she just keeps squeezing things in. She is 4th generation San Franciscan. She graduated from Lowell High School, so anyone that is here from the Bay Area is familiar with that. Double majored at Cal, got her master's at UC San Diego, and her JD at the Golden Gate University School of Law. Welcome.
Thank you.
One more little fact. Apparently she has a hidden skill. She can rap. You want to be by her at the networking event tonight. Our next panelist is Rachel Thomas. Rachel? Rachel is the co-founder and president of leanin.org. It is an organization dedicated to empowering women to follow their ambitions and their dreams. She has a long list of companies that she has been the president, the co-founder, the chief marketing officer, and so on and so forth. Some that I will mention to you that you might be familiar with. Subtext, which is a learning organization. It's a reading platform focused at kids K through 12. That company was acquired by Renaissance Learning. Playdom, which is a social gaming company that was acquired by Disney. And Rachel launched the first Web 1.0 recruiting firm known as Brain Trust. Quite an accomplishment, Rachel. She is graduated from Georgetown University. And a little fact there, she named all the companies that I just named for you. So we'll have to talk to her later about what was behind the name of all of those companies. Welcome and thank you. And our 4th panelist is Jennie Turpin. Jennie is the provost and vice president of academics at USF. And we joked a little because I wasn't familiar with provost, and now I am. Jennie has also quite a long list of accomplishments at her time at USF and prior. She's been at USF for 22 years. Prior to that, she graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a doctorate in sociology. Dr. Turpin, as I joked with her earlier, has been the Dean of College of Arts and Sciences, the Associated Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences, the founder of Women's Studies, and the chair of the Sociology Department. I wanted to make sure to read those because those accomplishments are unbelievable. She also has a little secret, and the little secret is getting out, and it's 3 letters, USF. She is really changing what that university has been, and it's messaging out, and it's been exciting to be native to the Bay Area and to see all of your accomplishments in that area. So welcome. Big round of applause for our panelists, please.
So welcome, everyone.
Hi.
Very exciting to be here with you all. I thought we'd start with a big question, with a lean-in question. How many of the people in the room have read Lean In? I'll be really impressed with some of the men. Oh yeah, sure. In Lean In, Sheryl Sandberg talks about the leadership ambition gap. So she basically cites numerous studies where men and women are asked, where do you see yourself, what do you want to be, and even refers to studies done among youngsters, adolescents. The same question is asked, who do you hope to become? And what's very clear is there are far more men aspiring to top leadership jobs. I think the McKinsey study she cites says 36% of men see themselves in the C-suite compared to a much smaller percentage of women. So what needs to be done for us to, if you will, get out of our own way? How will we get there if we don't even aspire? Who'd like to start?
I'll start.
Go for it.
I think a lot of it is cultural. I grew up in a very Asian household, even though I'm 4th generation on my mother's side. My dad was an immigrant. I was taught that I had to be pretty good at everything. I didn't have tiger parents, but pretty close, and it was all about hard work. And I'd say rather than lean in, zoom out and do a lot more observation of what motivates you, people who inspire you, and then you can become successful. It's not picking out one particular mentor, it's not picking out one particular mold. I started my life in corporate work at the then Big 8 accounting firm, so I'm really dating, or carbon dating as my friends like to say. But I realized I didn't really love that, and ultimately now I'm in public service, but it took trying that out. And now I'm really pleased to encourage more young women to study math and science, the STEM curriculum. And I think when you have something that's a very secure kind of academic credential, you're better off at making decisions. And I'm pleased to know that women, mothers in the audience who went to our Girls Up conference were really motivated to encourage their daughters to take more math and science and really dream. And I tell them, you know, who was Sally Ride's mentor? You don't need someone who looks like you, but you need to look to someone who has that kind of ambition and what your dreams are, and follow that person and observe that person.
So it starts young.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So I would say it starts really young. So who in the audience was called bossy as a girl? So bossy is a word that is almost exclusively reserved for girls. You never call a boy bossy, to the point where we have a little joke, which is next time you're going to call a girl bossy, say she has executive leadership skills. And you always laugh if you use it for a girl. If I told you the same joke and I said for a boy, no one would laugh, because we expect our boys to grow up to be leaders. In fact, if you go almost anywhere in the world, across almost any culture, the stereotypes are the same. We think boys will grow up to be leaders, and we think girls will grow up to be nurturing. So what happens is none of us are doing this on purpose, and I talk about this all day, I think about it all day, and I fall into the traps all the time. But we're discouraging our girls to lead from a very young age. It starts with words like bossy, but there's lots of other things we're doing. So the wage gap, actually, research shows, starts in the home. Boys typically make more money for chores than girls do, and girls typically do stereotypically female chores. Girls get called on less in class, they get interrupted more. So this is happening everywhere. And again, no one's doing it on purpose. But the more we understand that we're inadvertently holding our girls back, the more we can make a difference. And as you said, the research is a bit discouraging, but I think we can move the dial pretty quickly with a lot of little changes. But as early as middle school, girls, their desire to lead is less than boys' desire to lead, and that trend continues lifelong.
So you don't think that there's an inherent lack in those girls? It is simply suppressed so long that it becomes almost a weakness?
I think most of this is based in stereotypes and us sending message inadvertently to our girls that they're not leaders.
Mm-hmm. I think that's difficult to change.
Well, I was going to say, I think also the type of ambition that women have is different than the type of ambition that men have. I know in my industry, I find that the men want the editor job. They want to have the title. And the women are much more interested in doing the job and doing it well, which I think leads us to, to your question of how do we encourage more women leaders. Part of it is we have to look for them, because a lot of times they are doing the job, they just don't have the title already. We also have to let them know it's okay to say, hey, I'm doing this, give me the title, give me the stuff that I'm already doing in a lot of cases. We just, we say, well, I'm doing a job, I think they'll reward me, but a lot of times if you don't speak up, nobody knows you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Right. But how many women look at those top jobs and say, do they say, I don't see myself there, or I don't think they can do it, or do they say the price for that job, the price I would have to pay to climb to that top rung would be a higher price than I'm prepared to pay?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that, because how many of you have children or someone else who you take care of? Yeah. So there's a tremendous amount that we can do to change the way girls are socialized, and it starts when they're babies, and the dads are throwing the boy children up in the air and playing, and the little girls are held differently, and you can trace that across the life course. And I'm very, very much a part of that in higher ed, and trying to expose girls to STEM fields, encourage their leadership development. But there becomes a moment for many of us when we really do have to make a choice. And for women, most women go home at the end of the workday and they start what the sociologist Arlie Hochschild called the second shift. Yep. So, and that needle has moved a bit, but not that much. So if you look at an average day, the woman in a heterosexual marriage is still probably 25 to 30% more likely to be doing household chores in a given day, preparing dinner, and taking care of the kids. So I do think that there is a real decision. It's not an irrational decision if a woman says, well, I'm not going to go for that top job, in some cases, because she really has to say, is it going to be worth it for me to try to juggle these two jobs? Now, I think it's incumbent on us and on the community and our institutions to make it work for women and to create workplaces that support women, because supportive workplaces help women to be able to do that juggling.
Well, and I think to your point about teaching the young girls that it's okay to have executive leadership skills, that we also need to teach our young boys that they need to support, if they are heterosexual, their women. I mean, I don't think that this issue, I think Sheryl Sandberg's book was the first one to really point it out, that when we think, oh, everything's going to be 50-50, that's not true. And if you want to have the job and do a lot of things, my husband, I will freely admit, does at least, I'll be conservative, 60% of we have a 15-month-old, he's at least doing 60% of it, because I said, my job is important, I want to be able to come and speak to you awesome women, and, you need to be able to have that flexibility and choose partners and have a relationship that will allow you to do that too.
And when you tell people that, what do they say? So when you say, my husband does so much.
They say you're a horrible mother. No.
Do they say you're a horrible mother, or do they say that he's just magnificent?
He's amazing.
He's amazing.
He's amazing. Where did you find him? Kansas City, Kansas.
How many of you are amazing? Yeah, really. Where did you find him?
Just high school.
Oh, high school.
But they exist at other places.
Right. He's amazing. You're doing your job, but he's amazing.
But the thing I think need to do in the household, so I totally agree. We're not going to get enough balance in our lives if we don't get more support at home. Like, I think we universally agree with that. But I know I try a lot to really celebrate my husband and not to kind of micromanage in the house as well, because I think the other side of that is we're used to being kind of CEO of the house, and how do we let go of that, and what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to switch to another topic that all of you referenced a little bit. So, you know, one of the other attributes that we have, you know, and I like talking about these things because they're things that we can change, right? We don't have to wait for somebody else to change something. These are things that we can change. But one of the other attributes that women have is they're often not their own advocates. They don't advocate for themselves. They think that they go to work and they do a great job. When the next position opens up, somebody will tap them on the shoulder and go, I think you'd be perfect. Why don't you apply? Where, you know, many research studies have shown that within organizations, a position will open up, and men are much more confident applying for jobs that are many levels above them, right? Confident that they'll get it. And a woman who's, you know, just a centimeter below the qualifications doesn't apply, either because she thinks she would have been approached if she was the right candidate, or because she lacks the confidence to go for it. What's your thoughts on that, and what can we do about that in organizations? Jennie, you seem to have some thoughts on
well,
this.
you know, I see that happen a great deal in the university setting, and I've tried to be proactive and identify women who have that potential, and try to be that person to give them the push or the confidence to step forward. And I think we can do a lot for each other if we, you know, not only are thinking about, well, how can I advocate for myself, but how can I advocate for the next woman? And that can have a real multiplier effect. So I've tried to do that in the university setting. And then the women who I'm also trying to support turn to other women and support them so that it ripples across the organization. And I think it can be very powerfully transformative if we take on that advocacy role for each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have 2 points on that. One is, it's true, women need to feel like they hit about 100% of the criteria to apply. Men, it's more like 60%.
Yeah.
This is exacerbated by the fact that men slightly overestimate their skills and women slightly underestimate theirs. So if you ask your husband what his GPA was in school, he'll likely get it a little wrong high. You likely remember yours a little wrong low. And so one thing that we need to do as women, and managers need to realize as well, the guy sitting next to you, he's overestimating. That means you need to do a correction to even be even with him, and you need to really take a deep breath and do a correction to get a self, you know, a heavy sense of confidence. And then the other thing I would say is, it's interesting because we all are told to advocate for ourselves, but the reality is women are also penalized if they're seen as being too self-promotional. So one, I think, really real recommendation is get an advocate buddy. Find someone at work, another woman, where you agree, I'm going to look for opportunities to advocate you, and you're going to look for opportunities to advocate me. And what's great is you both win. And the extra plus is if you're advocating a woman in a meeting, your perception of being a leader or being a person in a position of authority actually goes up. So every time you advocate another woman, it's not only good for her, it's good for you. So go get an advocate buddy, and I think that that's one way that we can start to make a big difference.
Great.
I think it also starts with the executive level training to recognize that talents come in different packages. I mean, add a layer of ethnicity. Asian women, I think they're penalized with dual stereotypes. I'm a woman attorney, an Asian woman attorney. If I were in a law firm and I didn't speak up, I would get docked, oh, doesn't speak up enough. But if I were to speak up, well, I buck the stereotype, particularly with the older white male who might be the managing partner. And the Latina and the African-American women are expected to speak up, and it's nothing shocking. So I ride that fine line. I think it really starts with the training of the executive level to identify where talent comes from. I mean, I also arbitrate on panels where my co-panelists might be retired older men, and I do this for the Financial Regulatory Authority. More often than not, the attorney, if the parties are represented, the attorneys will address their comments on either side of me when I am the presiding panelist. And I love nothing better than to say, counsel, please address your question and comments to me. I will be making the ruling. So, but it really starts all over societal as well in where different talents and skills come. And it doesn't need to be the aggressive person who makes it to the top. I think leading by quiet leadership also works.
One of my favorite quotes that I've seen recently is Marissa Mayer, the CEO, the newish CEO of Yahoo, said, "You should always have a job that you're scared of." And I'm paraphrasing, but I will tell you, I go to work every day scared out of my mind, and I would never tell it. Don't go back to the newsroom and tell them I said that. But I mean, I think once you force yourself, because I can see what you're all thinking. You're like, well, I could do that job, but I don't know this yet. Even as we're saying it, you're thinking, and I know you are. And we all do that, and you have to push yourself and say, it's not going to be good for me and good for the company probably, or good for my family, unless I'm scared to do it.
You know, there's a moment in your career where you go from, you know, thinking about your own career to you become aware of your responsibility of the careers of women around you, right? And I think that's a very important responsibility to recognize. But it's also, once you recognize that, it's important to know how to constructively assist those women. You know, when you think about some of the younger or the, you know, up-and-coming women in your own organizations, what are some of the behaviors you observe in them? And you want to take them aside and go, no, don't do that. Or I did that, I recognize that, but let me explain to you why you're not helping yourself. What would some of those behaviors be?
So that's interesting. I have a pretty good group, so I'll have to dig a little bit deeper. Some of it's really classic stuff. A lot of, and little girls do this all the way up through entering their career, but ending with a question, I'm not sure this is right, starting with, I don't really know a lot about this, but.
I might not be right.
The constant disclaimers. Yeah. If you've got something to say, let everything else, the buts, the ands, the ifs, the up-talking fall away, and just say it. So I think that's like a big piece. You know, one thing I wish I knew earlier, and actually learned watching one of our lean-in lectures, but is this idea of power and influence, and how do you communicate power? So we think what we say is so important. I certainly always prepare if I'm going to get up on a panel or I'm going to speak. But in reality, you assessed my competence the moment I sat on the stage. I hadn't spoken. You did it based on my body language, and now it's more the intonation of my voice than what I'm saying. So I think that's a big piece, and a way that women can quickly learn how to get a bit more power and influence is understanding those things. Also in a meeting, if you talk within the first couple minutes of the meeting, you establish yourself as someone in the meeting who is in more of a leadership role. So there's lots of little, I hate to call them tips and tricks because I think they're so incredibly important. But there's lots of very small things that we can do, particularly as women, to establish ourselves as leaders and communicate with confidence pretty easily. So we have a lot of content on our site, lectures and little tips and tricks that you can try, but I encourage you all to figure out what are the small changes you can make on a daily basis to present yourself as more powerful, more influential, and more confident.
Excellent. Excellent. Audrey, do you have any women that you take aside and give some pointers to?
Yeah, and they run the gamut of, know-it-alls who are never going to be able to really build consensus, which is a huge problem in our industry. I mean, if you can't get somebody to talk to you, you're dead in the water, really. And then there's also, what I find myself personally doing a lot, and also my younger managers, is using the royal we or the royal you when you mean me. Like, you know what we should do? And really, I mean, you know what you should do? And just even, I notice the men don't address things like that in quite the same way. We try to soft pedal what we're saying, which I think makes us less effective. But, the biggest thing my colleagues have is, and I think this is true in other industries too, is women tend to take criticism, both within the company structure and external criticism, so much more personally than the men do. I mean, if you Google me, I look like a crazy person. And I'll go home and cry about it, but when you're in a public position, people are going to talk smack. And it's not going to be fair all the time. And the men see it as this badge of honor, which I wish I had, but I don't even think it's possible for most women to feel that way. And the more we can support each other and say, you know, that happened to me too, it's okay, this is how I deal with it, it's so important. We can't be islands.
So I think that's an important point, so I want to build on it. So McKinsey they do their Women in Work report, and it was interesting to see the two traits that they have tracked make women very successful. One is tenacity, but the other is accepting criticism well, or actually more the way to think about it as accepting feedback. So I think that women, we do tend to internalize a bit. I think it's important to realize if your manager's worth their salt, they're giving you feedback because they're invested in you and they want you to be better. And likewise, if you're a manager, your responsibility is to give good, thoughtful, and sometimes pointed feedback. So I think women need to kind of reframe the way they think about that feedback, that it's people actually investing in you and committed in your success.
But women tend to internalize failure, but often externalize success. I was lucky.
Yes, that's
you
so
know?
true.
And it's and very often, if you look at that concept of internal locus of control, it's a characteristic in people who are very successful in their life, but a more common characteristic in men for baffling reasons. And I think that's I think we've got to internalize success and let the failure roll off as a little more easier if we're going to be who
I think all these things, though,
be.
make us, in some ways, much more effective leaders. I mean, you know, the days of everybody being in their office and not talking to you, I mean, that's very, like, that's so 1992, you know? I mean, nowadays, if you go around San Francisco, you look at a modern tech office, they're all out there, the CEO, the COO, the interns, they're all sitting at the same table. And it's this sort of collaborative atmosphere that has allowed San Francisco to be such a leader in so many new areas. And it also is that collaboration that I think women specifically can foster in a much more successful way, too.
But I would say a lot of it is also generational, because I see too many people attach their electronic gadgets. So I would say talk to people, roam around your office. I see a lot of our legal interns at the Department of Insurance now. They don't say hi, they don't do anything. You know, I went to law school when I was in my early 30s. And I made sure everyone knew who I was. I was ready to take on any assignment. And what's the beauty of an internship? You might have career mentors for life, but if no one knows who you are, that doesn't help. So I would say put down your gadgets, get out there, and speak with authority. When you're going to present a case, the judge doesn't want to hear you equivocate. If you've done the work and you're prepared, and trust me, most of the women are way more prepared than the guys ever are. And so I've had interns win cases against $500 an hour experienced attorneys because I taught them to prepare. And you know, and don't take criticism personally, or even kind of the psych outs, I call them, because a lot of male attorneys, if they look at your bar number and it's higher, they expect that you're less experienced and less capable. And I told the women, don't worry about it. Your job is to win the case. Doesn't matter how you do it. So let them think you're not as bright, and you'll win the case.
I do think that reluctance to speak up is the trait that I observe most among the women I work with, and I want to say to them, you know, go ahead, jump in, and they will tend to wait and let the men speak first, as you pointed out.
And does that contribute to, because my next question was, you know, again, you know, looking at research, the McKinsey studies, a lot of people, men and women, ask the question: are women tough enough for these top jobs? Sure, you know, typically the more there are more female-dominated executive categories, but the top job, are the women tough enough? And I think the women ask themselves this question: is that just behavioral? Do women have the stuff to occupy those jobs today?
Women are tough. I mean, look what women do at home and at work, and any woman who rises to a leadership position has to be incredibly tough to get through everything that she goes through on the way. And I think this is just a false dichotomy. I mean, what women are really demonstrating in leadership roles is that you can be tough and nurturing. You can collaborate, you know, and have grit. And it isn't one or the other. And in fact, men should have that same latitude to demonstrate nurturing, collaborative characteristics as well as toughness. So, you know, I think the reason that so many women are succeeding is that they're effective collaborators as well as being tough.
Yeah, I would push that a bit further. I hope we get to the point where, is he collaborative enough? Is he communicative enough?
Yes, absolutely.
Like, in other words, women, and one of the things I don't want us to lose on this panel is women have a lot of strengths. like we have a lecture on difficult conversations, and the net is when women learn kind of the dynamics of a difficult conversation, we can be better at this. Power and influence, knowing when to play high and play low because you can read a room. Women can be better at this. There are lots of areas where we actually have incredible strength. So I think one of the focuses also needs to be on where are the areas where we excel, and let's lean into those. And I do hope we get to a point where leadership is defined more broadly, because you only have to look at what happened in Congress recently to know that women are good at reaching across the aisle, collaborating, getting people to kind of adjust the way they think, and these are very strong strengths and the strengths of a leader.
Excellent. So there was an excellent article recently in the New York Times called The Opt-Out Generation, and it told the story of a number of women, very successful business women who, 1998, 2000, decided, to get off the fast track and to stay home. So it was a big choice. They were high earners. And now it was, almost 15 years later, and in most of those cases, those women were trying to get back into the workforce. They talked kind of about the price that they paid for the choice that they made, the effect it had on marriages and that kind of thing. And now those women were trying to get back into the workforce, and they were really struggling. They were struggling, and they didn't even necessarily want to re-become who they used to be. They just wanted to be relevant again. And they were really having a lot of difficulty doing so. What advice do you have for women who are trying to make that move back in?
I'll speak as the non-mother and have been single all my life because I haven't found that guy that I think is going to
He's out there.
I'm thinking now, like on my next trip to Hong Kong, since I'm studying both Cantonese and Mandarin. I would say, you know what? You had that choice though, so consider it a luxury, and you got to spend time with your children, and you didn't become less of a person. You can only feel lesser if you give people permission to make you feel lesser. You're not lesser of a person. And even if you stayed in that high pressure work, the work atmosphere has changed tremendously. We've had law firms, private law firms that were over 100 years in San Francisco, very celebrated law firms that folded. So you could have been in that workplace and missed the time with your children and still be in the same position that you are today. So embrace it. You didn't lose the skills, but also you also come from a generation where you were more connected face to face rather than machines. So you actually have actual friends, not just virtual friends. And reach out to those people, because it's people that you meet in volunteer jobs. I got my job at the Department of Insurance because I was working at a Democratic club, and one of the bureau chiefs said, you have the perfect skills, mathematics background plus a law background, and we need you. So I would say, reach out to your friends, but don't feel lesser of a person. And remember, you made that choice. The really scary thing though, the highest rate from our studies at the Commission on the Status of Women, the highest rates of poverty among women are among divorced women. And as my dad always said, always know where your next meal is coming from, so you better study hard, get a good job, and the only person you can ever rely on is yourself.
And that's what the article talks about the most. Again, the women 10, 15 years hence, they said that was the most difficult thing to become adjusted to, was this concept of not being financially self-sufficient. And in many cases, that turned out to be problematic, right? Absolutely, because they didn't know where the next meal was coming from. Let's talk a little bit about networking, though, because that's interesting. Are women good at leveraging networks? Are women good at thinking about their networks as a source of professional opportunities, or are our networks for socializing and our offices for working? Rachel?
So we run what we call lean-in circles, which are small groups of women and or men who get together and meet on a regular basis. And one of the things that we've heard time and time again about the women who are meeting in circles, it's like these are women they were meeting with socially or doing other things with, and they never thought to talk about their careers. But their husbands are always talking about their careers. It is just across everything they do, talking about work, talking about career. So, I mean, that's one data point, but I think that there really is an argument to be made that as women, we need to remember our career is important. It's not the center of our life, but it's a central part of our lives, and how are we kind of taking it wherever we go, because men are certainly doing that.
Absolutely. Jennie, networking in academia is huge.
Yes, it is. I would agree, though, that this is an area where women could really develop men are much more likely, even in academia, to engage in the same kind of behavior that Rachel described. They're much more likely to be talking about it, thinking about it. Even women in the academy, you can go to an academic conference and women will pull out and talk about how are you balancing your family and your career, or other topics like that. And I think it's again, I don't really want to criticize the female behavior, because I also think it's valuable to talk about other things besides work, and to have friends and to have interactions that aren't about how can I leverage the person I'm talking with to do better. I actually think there's some, something honorable about that as well. So it's not a criticism. But on the other hand, I do think that the net result is that women do not overall leverage their networks in ways that advance their careers as predominantly as men do, and that's something that women could do more of.
Something we need to learn.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about work-life harmony. So we alluded to it a little bit at the beginning. It's certainly a huge issue whenever we talk about women in leadership positions, women in the top jobs. The women who've gotten there have learned to climb that hill. It's not that it wasn't present. They developed strategy. Sheryl Sandberg speaks quite eloquently about it, very amusing anecdotes. I certainly identified with many of the stories she told in the book. Can women do both? I mean, is it a trade-off? Can you either have, the family and the children or the big career? Is it really possible to do both today?
Yes.
Audrey, yes.
I mean, it is. It's. I find it such an odd question when people say, how do you do it all? And it's like, nobody asks the men who have 3 kids. I just have 1 kid. He goes to bed. He's fine. He doesn't know any better. He sleeps in my closet. Like, that's his bedroom. He doesn't know any better. It's fine. I mean, people have been doing, I'm not the first person to put a pack and play in the closet, I mean, I live in San Francisco. But the men have been doing this forever, and nobody thought to ask them how to do it. And the reason is because you just assume there's a woman at home being a partner. I mean, even there's so many holdovers from this. Just the other day, I was told, oh, we're going to have an editors meeting among all the Hearst editors. And I said, when? And they said, oh, sometime. And I thought, that's because all of you men have wives at home who are going to, presumably watch the children while you're gone. I need to know when this is, and you need to give me 3 weeks' notice. And I told them that, and they had not even thought about it. So I think we need to recognize where things are making it difficult for us to have that balance and speak up about them, because the truth is it didn't ever occur to them that they couldn't just drop a trip to New York on me with 2 days notice. It didn't occur to them.
So good advice for companies that are trying to have a more female-friendly or family-friendly atmosphere is, number one, the timing of meetings. I mean, 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Is that really necessary?
Right.
Right? Seriously?
Right.
Absolutely. What else?
So we have an ordinance that's pending. It's flexibility in the workplace, and we don't like to thrust things on people. And I think in California are way too many initiatives where the voters vote, and sometimes
you have a lot of initiatives in California.
Right, and sometimes the turnout is good, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's 10 years ago something crops up again. But I think it's just about society. I mean, I lost my mom this year to pancreatic cancer. It was swift, 6 weeks. My brother works in the healthcare field. He's a physical therapist. We have 2 other siblings out of state. But I kind of took charge. I had the luxury of doing that as a government employee. But flexibility is really important, because when we think about it, according to a state study, we have 4 generations in work right now. And so the traditionalists are they're attritioning out because of age. But still, the baby boomers are the largest, and they're stuck between making sure their kids get through college, taking care of their aging parents. So we need that kind of flexibility, and it has to be recognized. It's for the good of society. And I don't think burnt out people work very well. I mean, we read the articles that you had proposed here, and burnt out people just don't work well. And so the more flexibility, you actually get more out of your employee. I love being able to go to a community meeting and then have dinner. You might find me in my office at 11 p.m. That's a government employee. People I know have their stereotypes of a government employee. But then I know my friend Jim, I can count on him. If I'm there at midnight, he'll be there, and we're kind of like the night shift joke. So it's really a societal kind of paradigm that we need to push a little bit more.
So it's not about less time, it's about flexibility to weave your life into your job.
And I've been fortunate to have bosses who say, I don't care if you did your work in the bathtub, if it's on my desk when I want it, not a problem. And I've also, as women, sometimes we want to follow the way it's traditionally been done. And I remember saying to a boss, Scott does his cases differently. I observed one of his cases. Should I start doing that way? He says, you win your cases, don't change a thing. And that's kind of that little extra reassurance I needed. But again, most of my mentors have been males, I think because I've been in male-dominated fields. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I'm more like a guy. I'm more comfortable in mixed gender groups. And I'm the type who says, okay, what's the problem? How do we fix it? And I don't care about being liked or being this. I want to be respected for being the problem solver.
So just building on that, I think good to think about as HR professionals and managers, part of that is moving to a results-oriented culture as well. So part of it's flex time, but the other side of that is what did you accomplish? And that's how we should be measuring folks. Like coming out of the technology industry, particularly working in gaming for a while, where it's 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and being a mother and having to be on a different schedule, having a CEO that was very results-oriented, so you didn't need to be in the office, like when the rest of the team was incredibly powerful and really allowed me to have a better balance. So I think that's an important piece too. Let's shift to a focus on results.
And one more thing I would add is, you have to set boundaries too. I mean, if I say, I have, my iPhone goes off at 6:10, and that reminds me that it's time to leave the office. And I might log back in, but it's important to force yourself to leave. Force yourself that Sunday, I'm not going to do any work, that's family day. I mean, if you set boundaries for yourself, everything else sort of fills in. But if you have this freewheeling, like, I'll work all the time, that's when you start to have major burnout, at least for me.
And then you're an anti-role model, right? Because if you stay,
and you're also angry.
Yes, an angry anti-role model.
Yeah.
Yes, bad combination. Yes. Right, absolutely. And again, when we think, many of the people in the audience are from companies that are part of the group that make policies, and some of this is implicit, right? Some it's not conscious. If I stay in my office, I'm a good employee. If I work hard and late and I don't leave, I'm the last one, I'm a good employee. Well, in fact, I am accidentally excluding 50% of the workforce. What did Warren Buffett say? I only have to compete with 50% of the work.
He very generously said.
Yes.
He's been so successful because he only had to compete with half the population.
Yeah, half the population. So I thought that was a humorous way of putting it. But in effect, not pursuing your own balance, you are excluding so many people from the running.
Well, I used to joke, I used to run a team, and if they were like worked late or pulled an all-nighter, I'd be like, what did you do wrong that you had to work late or pull an all-nighter? Like, again, let's move to a results model. Like, that actually isn't a sign of being productive and organized. And
I've always said work smarter, not harder. And then as you go into law school, where there's just volumes of work, you have to figure out and really prioritize and what works. And I wouldn't be able to do all the things I do unless everything kind of dovetailed together. And you need to do that. And we had promotional interviews recently at our department, and someone talked about how do you manage your complex caseload, whatever. And at any given time, most of us have about anywhere from 35 to 45 cases going at a time. And I said, well, I kind of triage them. If I know someone's actively still committing insurance fraud, I got to get that person to cease and desist and get him off the street. But if I know he's in jail, the DA's got the U.S. attorney, some charges pending, then you know what? That file is not as hot because he's not active. That person's not doing active damage to our community. So you need to pick what your priorities are and learn how to prioritize, because I don't know, in this day and age of your electronics, everything seems so important, so really nothing's important. So you have to define what is your priority. Mm-hmm. And work doesn't have to be everything. And do you really need that really high-paying job, or are you satisfied with living comfortably and being able to do everything else you want? Time is the most precious commodity. You can never get it back. You can eventually figure out other ways to make money, but figure out how you want to spend your time. And I believe that success is being able to spend the time the way you want to spend it.
Mm-hmm. Mentorship programs. So a lot of companies toy with this, particularly as a way to develop high potential women, so assigning mentors, assigning executive sponsors. What do you think of these programs? You know, are they successful? Do you see them making a difference, Jennie?
Definitely. In the university setting, we assign a mentor to every new faculty member because there are very, strict criteria for how to succeed as a faculty member. You have to publish your research, you have to teach well, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and that's been a very successful program for us. We give mentors to both men and women, but in general, we would assign a female mentor. And I was like you, most of my mentors were men, but so it's been really fantastic to be able to put women together and put senior women with younger women who can help them to succeed. And we have found that to be very, very successful. But I also agree that men and women can mentor each other.
So I would say the good news is research shows that women who have mentors through a formal program are 50% more likely to get promotions than women who go find mentors on their own. Not to say that if you find a mentor that's not valuable, just mentors through organized programs are incredibly effective. The flip side of that is 2/3 of male managers will admit to being uncomfortable in the room with a younger woman or a woman at all. 50% of young women are nervous about talking to or interacting with older men. So there's a dynamic where we have mentorship programs in place, but if we don't culturally understand some of the complexity about bringing older men and younger women together, like they're not going to be as successful as they could be. So I'll give you an example. You see a man in a restaurant together, what does that look like? Mentoring. You see an older man and a younger woman in a restaurant together, what does it look like? It looks like a date. So what I would say is mentorship programs are wildly successful when they're working, but within your organizations, if they're not working really well, one of the things to look at is that we're fundamentally sometimes uncomfortable with the opposite sex, and how can we talk about that openly and break down those barriers?
And I would just add one thing to that, that it's also important to seek out women of color who can mentor each other. In my experience, that it's been important for women to be able to talk to another woman who might have had some of the same experiences culturally, cultural biases or whatever the experience might be. And so it's not only about gender, but also other identities.
That's a great point.
But I would say have more than one mentor. And sometimes these formal programs don't always work because someone will say, oh, I'm in a mentorship program, but they don't actually take advantage of it. It's sort of a label. So I like to do my approach to it, zoom out, see who's successful, observe, and volunteer to work on that project. Yes,
absolutely.
And be engaged with that person.
So seek your own mentors or your own sponsors, which are different but perhaps more valuable. So now let's talk about your own careers. When you think back over your careers, what advice do you have for the women in the room? What have you done well that you would definitely repeat? And what kind of sticks out in your mind as a monumental goof that if you had it all to do over again, you probably wouldn't do that?
I'm not sure about the goof, but I guess I would say what I think I've learned and what has worked for me is very much like what Susie said actually about being driven by what you're passionate about and what you're interested in. And so for me, I haven't really sought out, I want that next position, I want that promotion. It's been more about, I have an idea, or I want to learn more, and that other job gives me an opportunity to keep learning and growing. And so I think if you lead with your growth and your passions and your ideas and creativity, that you will move into very fulfilling roles. And that's been my experience.
Excellent.
I think for the most part, the ask forgiveness, not permission, is really true. I mean, there's very little you can do in your career that can't be undone in one way or another. If you make a decision at work, and I can't think of very many that you can't go back and say, this wasn't a good decision, I can redo it. The only thing I ever regret is not being aggressive enough with whatever I was doing. And I actually have this written on my desk, like just move fast and break things, because you will only be faulted for sitting on things and not doing anything. Like, you will never be faulted for trying something new, and if it doesn't work, you'll get the feedback, and you'll say, you're right, this was a bad idea, who thought of that? That was me. We're moving on, and I think people appreciate when you do that a lot more than just sitting going, oh, I don't know, my boss won't give me permission to do it, or, that's not successive. That's not success in any part of the definition.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had any kind of regrets. They're always learning experiences, and of course you make mistakes along the way, but sometimes ignorance is bliss too. I didn't really know about negotiating salaries when I first started. So, I have the partners at Cooper's and Library say, oh, we're hiring you, we're so impressed, you have a master's in applied math from UC San Diego, double degree pure math and statistics from Cal, and we want you. Well, I didn't know I could negotiate my salary. This is my first job. I was happy. Lots of my classmates were there. And then I find out with a guy who is with less education, we had the same billable hours. I probably had the top 4 or 5 clients, and these were like Fairchild Semiconductor, Century, and I was making $20,000 less a year. And I was pulling all-nighters just like the guy. But you know what I told my parents? I said, if I don't do it, someone else will. And even though I hate this job, I'm going to be here and learn as much as I can and then leave, because I consider them now paying me to learn instead of me paying an institution of higher academic learning. And then, later on when I got into law school, this is how I say always be prepared. So the second years we're doing oral arguments for appellate advocacy. And so you have to compete and you see who wins. Well, I thought, I'll sit in the final oral arguments. I think, I'd like to win that prize if I could. Let me see what it takes. Well, I sat in and it was great. And so the following year, I was awarded Best Brief and runner-up Best Oral Advocate because I, was curious. I mean, it's the same thing like being a presidential delegate. It's really a white male club. If you go into the Democratic National Convention, even the California Democratic Convention, it's mostly white male. And I thought, well, how do you become a delegate? So curiosity is a good way to overcome barriers too. And just a little bit of ignorance, not thinking that you can't do it because no one else has done it before.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit drawing from the same well, but I fail really well. Like, not only do I do it a lot. I have a lot of
experience with that myself.
Not only do I do it a lot, like I'm pretty comfortable with it. And I actually think, all kidding aside, that's like something you should get comfortable with. I would argue if you don't try things you think you'll fail at, you're not trying hard enough. And what I always do, a little game I play with myself, is I imagine, what's the worst thing that could happen? Can I live with that? 9 out of 10 times, I can live with it. I go for it. Sometimes I fail. Sometimes I don't. But, women studies show we are less risk averse. More risk averse. Yep. We're less likely to go for it. So I do think learning to fail, getting comfortable with failure, and exercising that muscle, because I truly believe it's a muscle, is really important. So.
The fear of failure can also be a success factor, because it can make you over-prepare and try so much harder.
But you need resilience. I think the things for the parents here that the best skill is to teach your children resilience and disappointment. I've had times where I feel like crying, and I'm like, no, I don't have time to cry. Let me figure out what I need to do better. And my mom used to always say, figure out what you need to do better to move ahead.
And I always say, be risk aware, not risk averse. Mm-hmm. So know what you're getting into, but go for it.
Go for it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's not much you can't undo.
No, there's nothing.
There are a few things. Let's be honest.
Very, very few. Look, newspapers, I have to tell you, are the most risk averse. That's why they're going out of business. Right. And it hasn't changed since Gutenberg invented the press very much. And everybody, oh, we can't do that to the business section. Well, why not? We do it every day. We print the thing over and over and over. We could change it.
And I love my Chronicle every morning.
Thank you.
And I used to write for Asian Week. But you look at the New York Times, they've had so many people who plagiarize, fabricated sources, and they're still in business. So really, you can mess up and still survive.
Great. There's a lesson for today. Absolutely. You can mess up and still survive. Can I open it up to the floor? I'd love to hear what you would like to know from our panelists. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just wondering about mentorship. Have any of you mentored a younger man.
Oh, yes, I have.
And what are you teaching them? How are they coming to you, and what are they asking for?
You know, mainly it's situational at work. The men tend to come in less frequently than the women with, you know, how do I balance and you know, how do I take care of my children and do my job? And they tend to be more concerned about how to be effective at work. And I do think that, I hope that I have, in that mentoring capacity, encouraged them to redefine leadership in the way Rachel, you know, mentioned, that a more feminine style of leadership, which is collaborative and more nurturing and more inclusive, etc. I do believe I have shared that style and approach with the men. But it's been very rewarding for me, and I hope for them as well.
And do you think they think of it that way? Gee, I'm going to ask this female mentor, or is it kind of more of a gender-neutral perspective that they have?
I think they just see that, you know, she's been there, she's done it, now I'm facing the same situation, I've got to go get her advice. And I think they also know that I am, and I don't know if this is a part of being a female leader, but that I am very willing to share with them, you know, what's worked for me, how I think they can effectively handle a situation at work. And I've had a number of men recently, computer scientist who's gone into academic administration, contacted me recently and said, can I just talk to you because I'm thinking about, you know, trying to move up to the next level, possibly being a dean. What kind of feedback do you have for me? So,
excellent.
I enjoy it.
I think some of the younger men also see the nurturing aspect too. And for me, a lot of the men come to me looking for the particular law I do, which is administrative law and arguing cases, but also they like that I do a lot of things outside of work. So they want to be more involved in community, and I'm very pleased about that, because I think the more we can build well-rounded people, the more we hopefully won't have to worry about that balance at home, like is the guy caring enough to share, if he recognizes that he wants to be more giving beyond just the you know, four corners of his office.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Other questions? Yes.
So this one comes from Twitter.
Twitter.
So name your fatal flaw. Even as a successful female leader, what can you still improve upon?
Fatal flaw.
How many can you take?
Sorry.
Yeah, right.
Rachel, do you have any fatal flaws? Let's just.
Well, I've already said I fail well, so
that doesn't sound fatal to me, then. So what would be a significant flaw? Like if you could change something about yourself still today, what would that be?
Yeah, so I think I am a true extrovert, which means I think with my mouth, and I do. Anyone who works with me will tell you that. And so, you know, learning to hold back a little more is a lifelong journey for me because I am so incredibly extroverted. So I don't think it's a fatal flaw, but it's one that I'm always aware of. And particularly, I have a couple people on my team who are quieter. And so wait for it, they're women. Women are less likely to speak up. I run an organization all about empowering women. If I'm not sensitive to that, I'm like failing on so many levels. You cannot go to sleep at night. So, I mean, that's an area where I'm really constantly learning and on a kind of journey with myself.
Very interesting. Jennie, what's wrong with you?
This is going to sound kind of ridiculous, I think, but I was raised to be very nice. And I'm from the South, and people are meant to be nice. And I mean, it's a good quality, so to say that's a failure, but I find that sometimes in a very challenging environment, in a meeting at work, for example, when somebody ought to be called out for their naughty behavior right there on the spot, I will be reluctant to do so sometimes. And I will go away feeling like, you know what, I should have called him out. You know, there was a bully at the meeting, or there was somebody, and oftentimes it is a male figure who, you know, needs to be addressed in the moment. And I will tend to not want to do it in the moment, to go think it through and then decide what's the best way to come back and deal with that individual. And it's something I would like to develop. I don't mean to be less nice, but I mean to be able to, in the moment, call out behavior that's inappropriate stop it, for other people.
Right, absolutely. Julie, we know you're good at math. What are you not good at?
I'm not a morning person, so if I'm missing opportunities, they probably happened in the morning. And I've told many a boss, if you want me at your 7:30 breakfast meeting, I'm not your woman. But if you want me to pull an all-nighter and write for you, I'd rather do that. And also, I have way too much paper in my life. So, and lawyers, unfortunately, can't get away from that. You need 5 copies at your hearing. You need the authenticated copy. So, what can I do?
You're a slave to your paper.
Yes.
Audrey.
Well, you probably can tell this already, but everything is very personal to me, and like you all know that my kid goes to sleep staring at my shoes. So
in the closet.
Yeah, in the closet. But and sometimes I expect everybody else to be like that. Like, what's wrong with you? Why is the kids not sleeping? And I think sometimes it's difficult for me to totally switch off when I'm being the mother and the nurturer, and when stuff needs to get done. So oversharing is probably...
Oversharing, yes.
Oversharing.
Yes, we've all been guilty of that, absolutely. Yes?
Yeah, I work for a company where we have all male executives, about 30% female that manage executives.
Oh dear.
And so I talk to them about, I manage HR and recruiting, and so I meet with them often. I talk to them how important this matter, especially for women in tech and tech startups. And they just give me blank stares across the room. And a lot of them are European, so they don't necessarily have this as much of an understanding of the market and the tech market in San Francisco. How have you worked with male colleagues, especially at the executive level, when they've often excited about promoting women or looking at ways of advancing women or hiring women in executive roles?
So I think that to get anybody to do anything, you need to tell them why it's good for them. Not to say that people don't want to do it because it's altruistic or because they believe in women, but at the end of the day, like, how does it help them? So a couple things I would share, there's lots of other research. Diverse teams are more productive. They are more effective. So that's not just gender diversity, that's ethnic diversity, that's sexual orientation. Diversity is good. And there are lots of studies that show having women in positions of leadership results in better policy, happier employees. So there's lots of bottom line reasons that getting women into your organization and getting women into positions of leadership are a good idea. So I would push the economic argument first, and if that doesn't work, they probably have daughters, and that seems to be incredibly effective.
Do you have presentations at your work? Yeah. Just big meetings? I mean, that's another way to get women to also do the presentations, especially at their current projects, because then it's sort of kind of a think tank altogether and get those women in there. But it is better for the bottom line, and you can just do some searches, and there are some extensive studies of having more women in executive leadership is good for the bottom line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes?
What do you think we need to get to a point where we stop having to prove ourselves so we can promoted
because of what?
Our potential. I think what you're pointing out is that it's not up to only our individual behaviors, but we're struggling with the weight of the whole culture. And as was pointed out earlier, it's not just in the United States, and this is a cross-cultural phenomenon that women tend to have to really, fight to be equal. And so, it's a complex problem to wrestle with, but I think it has to happen at all these different levels that have been raised today, that it is our individual behavior, it is our workplace environment, it is the public policy domain, which defines, much of what we can do. The law is, an important area. So it's really, to use the tired phrase, it takes a village, that it's really going to take women and men working at a variety of levels to create change. And, we're pretty lucky to be the beneficiaries of a lot of the change that has taken place because of women who went before us, but there is a lot more to do.
So I would say a lot of things are subjective. So by virtue of you getting an interview, having the job, you already met the objective criteria. So a lot of it is subjective. Are you reliable? Do people like you? Do they mind seeing your face every morning if you have morning meetings? And so I would say never stop being prepared, because if you think you can ride on your potential because of your degrees and everything else, that's not enough. And you have to be results oriented. That's something we brought up here. So, but if you want to see change, you have to start the dialogue and know which person to go to and volunteer to be that person to make the change. I used to have friends in law schools and ask me, how come the dean always buys your ideas and whatever? And I said, because I volunteered to do it. I said, if you want me to implement it, I will. And sometimes he'd have a staff person do it. But you know what? If I didn't believe in my idea enough that I was willing to spend my own time and implement it, then why would someone else want to do it? So think about, if you can invest your own time in some idea, a cultural change within your own organization.
Rachel, do you think it'll look a lot different 25 years from now? Do you think when we see the picture of the executive in the annual reports, there'll be a few less whiskers, or?
I, of course, wholeheartedly do.
Okay.
But, I mean, the big piece of this is complicated stuff, and I said this earlier, but I think it's important to just pause on. There's lots of little things that we can do every day to make a difference. There's policy, there's a lot of HR folks in the room, there's organizational policies that can make a change, but as individuals, raise your hand. Don't wait for someone to call on you. Raise your hand. Sit at the table. I mean, these are very common lean-in themes, but there's a reason. Like, if we wait for people to invite us to the party, we may be waiting a very long time. So I think that's a really big piece here. There's lots of little things we could do. And one thing I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about, especially since we have so much HR talent in the room, I do want everybody before you leave to understand the likability penalty. So as women get more successful, they're less liked than men. And when women exhibit leadership traits, they're often less liked than men, by women and men. This isn't because any of us are bad people. It goes back to those stereotypes we talked about earlier. We expect men to lead, so we're comfortable when they do it. We don't expect women to lead, so it makes us a little uncomfortable. They're going against the grain. So for everybody in HR, every manager in the room, the next time two candidates are up for a promotion and you hear language like, she's not quite as likable, she's a little aggressive, too ambitious, your radar should go up. Is that gender bias? And here's a really easy thing we can all do to start making a difference tomorrow. Ask, what exactly did she do? Like, what are the traits or the activities that make you think she's too aggressive? Write it down, say it back to the person, and then ask, if a man did the very same thing, would he be too aggressive? And I am willing to bet you 9 out of 10 times the answer will be no. The point of that story is I don't want you to leave without thinking that through, but the other thing is these are little changes that we can make. We have CEOs literally coming up to us and joking we're costing them money because women are going out and asking for raises more than they ever have before, and like right on. So little things that we can do that I think actually over time in all seriousness are going to drive a lot of significant change.
There's a woman who started her own company, and she was at a leadership training for Asian American women. And so as she was interviewing employees, she would stop at the end and she's like, you didn't negotiate your salary. I put this down. Is that really what you were worth? So she was trying to train the women to negotiate their salaries. So, and she, most of the people got the job, but she just wanted to raise to them that you have to start valuing yourself more and learning how to push for what you want.
Next question. Yes.
I don't know how to ask this about just being born. You spoke about, as girls, we're bossy. Now, as women, you kind of touched upon it. Personally, how are you a strong leader in a, male-driven organization, effective, yet not come across as you were not bossy of the other one?
So this is challenging. Right? There's a little bit of what's called it's a double bind, right? When we act like leaders, we're dinged a bit for it. If we don't act like leaders, we're dinged a bit for it. So this is not without some complexity, and being aware of it is helpful in itself. Some things I do, I spend a little bit more time than maybe a male would explaining my rationale for making a decision. I use we language a lot, which is a very common tactic. So instead of saying I deserve, I think, I switch it to why it's beneficial for the team. So I hate to, there's a bit of a chicken and egg. You're almost giving advice that it's painful to give because you wish this wasn't the case. I smile a lot. So there are little things you can do, and one thing that's really interesting for the more senior women in the room, I talked earlier about a lecture that we developed with Stanford called Power and Influence. We focus grouped it, and this was really interesting. Older women, senior women, I don't need it, I got it. Over and over again, I got it. Younger women, really, really hungry for it, really need it, and the older women think they've got it, and they don't. So I think that this is, again, kind of, let's be very aware, let's really think it through, but that was a really interesting learning for me, is a lot of it more senior women thinking that they had been there, done that, they had this nailed. In reality, I think we're all learning and should keep evolving. So
I think you always have to know your audience. I mean, I used to be a reporter too. You have to know who you're writing for, you have to know who you're interviewing, and it's a different approach for different people, different office cultures, different ethnicities. So it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all. And I've also trained women candidates on how to speak, and women do tend to smile a lot. But it doesn't work when you say, we are facing dire economic times. And I would say, stop smiling and, have those pregnant pauses. I think women are afraid that if they don't fill up every bit of airtime, they're seen as less intelligent because they're not thinking as quickly. But those pregnant pauses are very effective, and it shows someone really being thoughtful about what they're saying.
Good. Do we have a last question? Yes, ma'am.
Would you consider kindness in this time being a weakness? Because I've kind of grown up being taught that as well, and have learned, in my industry, because I do work with older women and there is a generational gap, and have been told that you almost won't be quite as successful if you're approaching things in that way. And it's not that I'm not determined, but I grew up differently. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, despite what I said earlier about the flaw, I do think kindness is a strength, and that being able to be in a working environment and have strong relationships with the people you work with can come from that kindness. And so I don't view it as a weakness, I view it as a strength. However, I also think there's the moment, if you're in a leadership position, when you may have to act in a way that's more directive and sometimes disciplinary. And so it's being able to do both.
I think we need more civility.
Yeah.
I mean, the most stressful part of my day is riding public transportation. You probably riding your scooter and people dodging in front of pedestrians and bicycles and Muni, and so. But you can be kind and nice, compassionate, and be an effective leader. I think if you're seen as being very fair, you can dole out the bad news. I always tell people my job, working in an office where there is an elected official at the top, I have to be able to have the guts to give that boss the good, the bad, and the ugly. One of our questions on the promotional exam was, what if the insurance commissioner just gave a press release touting something and you realize it's in contravention to existing law? And I said, well, having experience in the media, usually they're kind of open, kind of airy sound bites, so nothing too specific and we can fix it. But if you're not prepared to give like the bad and the ugly to your boss, then you're not very worthy to that boss. So you want to make sure you have an overall balance. And you don't need to be like a guy and be aggressive to be effective.
I would say, and this kind of goes to your question too, that the way I've found, especially as one of the only women top editor, I mean, there aren't very many in the country, but there are definitely none that are in their 30s. The thing I've found, your stereotype of an editor is like, the angry, like yelling at everybody person, except nobody wants to work with that person because he's a jerk. And so there's your own personal success, but then there's also the success of the people who work for you, and they don't want to work for somebody like that either. And no matter what their gender is, they don't want to be that person. So what I tell myself every day is, the only thing that matters is that you are supportive of the people, and for me, the journalism. Everything else is nonsense. So if I'm being bossy or, they think I'm being bossy, I explain It's either about people or journalism. If they think I'm being too kind, it's about people or journalism. And if you have your priorities straight, I feel like everything else sort of falls in place, and then you will be successful because the people that work with you and for you will be more successful.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank everybody very much for your attention. This has been a great discussion. I think that so much of what we've talked about has resonated certainly with me, and I'm sure with many of the people in the room. I now invite everybody to a little cocktail we've organized, so you have the opportunity, if you want to have a one-on-one conversation with one of our panelists, by all means. Let's be courageous and walk up and share your stories and listen to their advice. And so let's break some bread. Thank you very much.